Okay. Greetings, everyone. Welcome to your Teaming Transformation. This is the big finale. And so I want to thank you for coming along with me on this journey while I, kind of develop this stuff. And so now we've gone through a whole arc, and now we're going to do, after this, we'll do a live course of this material, and then we'll record it and we'll get it out in the world. So thank you for coming along with me on the journey. And yeah. And I can feel the momentum like daily building. So it's exciting. All right, let's see if I can share my screen.
It's just is fabulous what you're doing.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. It's coming together finally. It's been a long journey. Oh my gosh, I can't believe I'm still alive.
I first ran into biomimicry at Tufts University. We were at there was an environmental expo that they sponsored, and an architect was giving a presentation on that. I had my booth with the Institute for Biodynamic Shelter, which was trying to bring in that living vitality within the home space. Anyway.
It's interesting. My dad is an architect, so I grew up in that, and he would take me out to the desert to see the Buckminster Fuller, like the geodesic domes, and talk to me.
Awesome.
So I feel like I'm an honorary architect. Like I was definitely trained for that profession. Yeah. And so the idea is that we're really trying to architect systems. We're still architects.
Yes.
The little walls are so yesterday.
In the literal meaning of building the arch that connects us all.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
So welcome to the Teaming Transformation. This is the last one, so we're going to try to wrap it up. We're going to go kind of over the patterns, pull out some of the highlights, and and we got Melina too. And then we'll go into it. We'll play with it some more. I'll just wait for her to come on. There she is. Hi, Melina. How are you?
Hi, Tamsin.
Hi, how are you doing?
Good. How are you?
Very good.
Thank you for hosting.
Oh, sure. So I was just saying, this is the last one in the series, and then we're going to do a whole course of it, and then we're going to record it and get it into like business schools and all of that. So this is the last one. So we're going to go through the kind of the overall patterns and pull out some highlights, and then we're going to dig into what we can do with it. So, of course, we have all these things we want to do in the world that we desperately want to do, and we can't seem to make the changes that we need to make as fast as we need to make them. And so, for me, I'm an evolutionary biologist, and I spent all this time in Ethiopia studying these wild baboons. And what I was trying to understand is, how does social change actually happen? How does evolution actually happen in social animals like us? So I was looking at these two different kinds of baboons and the way their social lives are, and then how that affected their genetic structure, which affected the rate of evolution and their degree of collaboration. So those kind of patterns that I found, I'm applying now to our own lives and trying to see if we can do things better. So of course, our go-to here is to figure out the problems and then standardize and scale. But if you look here, we're living things, right? We obey all the same forces. But if you look at STEM, which is supposed to be solving our problems, right? The thing that's missing from all these logos is any living thing whatsoever. Which is just crazy. But so that's where we're at. We're biological creatures. We're subject to the same conditions. And yet our leaders are blind and illiterate when it comes to the way that life actually works, and even our own human nature. We make all these assumptions about what we are as creatures, but I can tell you from studying all these different primates that we're quite unusual. So one thing we know about living systems is they grow from the bottom up. They don't standardize and scale down like that. That's not how it works. So, and we're living things. We are exuberantly amazing in our own right. So we are nature and we've got the goods too. So it's just figuring out what our structures are that are getting in the way of all this. So I like to start with leaders because they come in with this very literal understanding of living systems. I like to kind of start from the beginning and build it up the way nature does. So, how does life actually change? How does it actually adapt to change? There's a certain amount of diversity in a population, and things are, forces in the world are selecting. So you're getting the whole population shifts in one direction or another. But of course, there's a lot of different selection pressures, and they're always variable. And so some things work here and some things work there. And so you get a certain amount of diversity that's held in the population that's required for them. So life's purpose is to nurture the next generation and ensure its success. And the only reason that is because the ones that did it made more. It's and so it's just an amplification of these emergent processes. And so here, we think of evolution as, mostly when I talk to leaders, they're like competition, survival of the fittest. And here's this bighorn sheep that actually lives in my canyon. And that's competition, drives those giant horns, which is really not that great for the sheep, but it helps him get the chicks. So he puts up with it. So, but the thing is that generally life avoids wasting its energy and life on competition. If it doesn't come down to getting the chicks, you don't do it. You just go the other way, right? And these are these walking palms in Panama. And if they don't like the light where they are, they just move away. So life doesn't actually solve problems. It just finds the next open door. And you can see this pattern everywhere, at every scale of life. So here's this slime mold, and it's going out. Individuals are searching for food, and it presents this kind of pattern. And again, like water flowing downhill produces the same kind of pattern. These are just deep patterns in life. And of course, now after all those organisms finding the path of least resistance in that way, we now have some 30 million species from those first sparks of life. And so every one of those individuals has this unique developmental potential. They can actualize their being. And when they do that, it actualizes the system. And if the system if those beings can't actualize it because the system is preventing them, then the system can't actualize either. It's both things are occurring at once. So what is that potential? It's an emergent feature of our everyday lives, right? We just do the best we can with what's available. So we have a certain amount of diversity in our populations, and that is the limiting factor on the rate of change. So if you want more change, you increase diversity. But now the exchange itself, when species can't solve their own problems or manage their own needs with the limited skill set that they have to rely on exchange. So trees can't, fertilize themselves. They need to attract these mobile pollinators, and they partner with other organisms that can do the things that they need. So they're always looking for those complementary, capable, reliable partners, and they invest in them. They grow those partners, and that is growing the opportunity. So the available food, shelter, mates, partners, they're investing in that and growing it. So this is this potential-oriented design. Life is continually growing capabilities by partnering with other organisms. So this diverse exchange expands their capabilities and opportunities. So this is really the deep pattern that's going on, that's growing the value in these systems. So we can think about it as leaders of like, how would we cultivate potential in these populations? Well, you would increase diversity, you would increase trust and exchange and capability and complementarity. And then you would grow the opportunity space for everyone. And there's a variety of ways that natural systems do that. So this is an interesting thing. I'm a biologist, deep scientist. We don't do pentacles as a rule. But what I was unable to do is, in biology and science, you're always breaking things down and not analyzing them into components. And when you do that, it's sort of like pinning insects on a board, right? They're dead. So how do you analyze living things without killing them? And so this is one way. This is systematics. This came from Bennett, who worked with same kind of time as Bertrand Russell, one of my deep heroes. So they were looking at that time in like the 20s and 30s. They were looking for these deep patterns, mathematical patterns of the universe and the world and the way things work. So this pentat is one structure that they came up with, and it allows you to pull apart a living system and kind of tease it out, almost like a cat's cradle kind of thing. So you can see the system without breaking it. So
it seems like you're trying to derive something, and it's almost like you could change that word to you're defiving something.
Defiving.
You're defiving something.
I'm gonna write that down. Yeah, because we're trained, well, as a scientist, we're super trained in deductive reasoning. But how do you see these patterns in the first place? You need inductive reasoning to do that. And it isn't really something they teach us in science. So this, no. Right. So by finding like the Regenesis Institute systematics and Bennett's systematics, I've been able to supplement that so I can describe the patterns in ways that other people can hear. So here's a basic deep pattern. So individuals have a nature, they have some being, core being, and they have to get nutrients, they have to eat, and that's out in the wider world. But they also, in that process, they have a role in the wider ecosystem. And these two things have to feed each other. And so what happens is organisms couple these two things as much as they can over time so that it's a reliable source. And then these are the operations, this middle part. So this is just what they do in order to get there. So, but what happens is by doing this process, this pattern, they become more themselves. They differentiate and they become more unique. And they also become more independent, interdependent with their environment. So that's just a general way of looking at the entire pattern of an organism's life. And you can see they feed what feeds them. They link that, like with the sloth, he's got these hairs that have these grooves in them that fill with water. And it's actually like a living chia pet. He's growing algae in the fur, and that is his source of nutritional supplement. He just licks that stuff off you. It's sort of like having a smoothie all over your body for little snacks. But anyway, the source and the role have become so coupled that he just keeps them on his body. Life is always creating conditions conducive to life in that way. And you can see like here at like Glacier Bay, as the glacier recedes and this bare ground is revealed, lichens start coming in and making soil. The soil allows these annual seeds and weeds to blow in and grow. And then slowly you get a mycelial infrastructure underground that's kind of tying this together. And now bigger shrubs can come in and tap into that infrastructure. And then gradually the trees come in, and then you get this mature forest where, maybe it's all one kind, maybe it's all conifers. And so they each are growing the system for each other until it reaches some maximum productivity. And so, we're increasing our opportunity by investing in one another. And that's what living things are always doing. And by doing that, they can surf for free on the potential in motion. You don't have to do everything. You can just find things that are already happening and tag along. And that's the way life works. It's always yes and. It's not like, oh my God, there's a problem, let's, build an addition. No, the bird just hatches. Let's see. So this is a good one. I've been working a lot with entrepreneurs, with EO organization and YPO organization. And these guys are very much efficiency minded and trying to scale their businesses. But one thing they asked me, well, I say, well, nature doesn't solve problems. It, just moves to the next open door. The baby bird hatches. And so they asked me, isn't the lion a problem for the gazelle? And I was like, well, yeah, the lion is a problem for that gazelle. But the process of lion and gazelle is a system that makes both of them healthier. If the lion was just handed gazelles on a platter, it would get fat and it would eventually stop being a good lion. By the way, this is not a lion. But the gazelles, the same thing. If you were going to keep them safe in a cage, they would become fat and lazy and they would stop being gazelles. And they would eat all the grass in that one place. They need to be moved along so that everybody does better. So they're not problems. They keep each other healthy. So here's this overall, I'm sure you're all familiar with the adaptive cycle, but this can be very powerful for entrepreneurs, especially so as we saw, those ecosystems grow in value until they're locked up. It's all conifers, all one kind. And, they're taking all the light. How are you even going to get a start in there? So you've got these locked up resources, but disturbances happen and open up new ground. And then again, the new things come in and grow and you're in the same place. So that's this adaptive cycle. So disturbances create opportunities. You can, the little low investment opportunists work fast and grow. And that paves the way for these longer term investors that are really investing in relationships to keep that. So, but what happens, these are elephants. What they do is they knock over trees, are very destructive. And they're actually creating new habitat. They're actually providing those disturbances that prevent the forest from being locked up so that new starts can get a start. So it increases the diversity of the habitat and increases the opportunities for everyone. And that's the same thing we do. These small disturbances that overall they increase the health because they reduce the volatility of the system. And they increase that bare ground, those opportunities. So that's kind of our special sauce. These conscious evolution. It's the little things that we do. So getting to our nature, our own nature as living things, we are only 5 million years. We shared an ancestor with chimpanzees, and bonobos are our other closest relatives, about 5 million years. And they're really clever. They're very caring with each other. They love each other and all the things, they have imaginations and all those things. But they are different from us in that they really are competing with one another. They are not super organisms. They aren't taking care of each other in this deeper way. And so for us, it really does take a village for us to survive. We are super organisms, and it's a fundamental difference in our ecology. This is a little naked mole rat. He's so cute. But so he's a superorganism too, the only other mammal superorganism besides ourselves. And so it's basically a community of diverse and independent individuals that share a purpose and identity, and they grow value together through these symbiotic relationships. And that requires a territory because all those symbioses are in one place. So you can think about that as a model and compare that against our own lives and see where there might be some deficits. So for us, that potential is not just individual, it is also collective, and it's also multi-generational, and it's also across species because we invest in these symbioses. So our potential is quite different. from many other organisms. So superorganisms have this deep pattern that you see again and again. So many eyes and minds, diverse eyes and minds, are gathering value in the world. And they upcycle it through these symbiotic relationships. You know, the leafcutter ants are chewing up these leaves and feeding them to their fungal gardens underground. And that is converting that cellulose and fiber and the things that the ants can't digest into something they can eat, which is these mushrooms. And it's very rich, and they can eat that. So that's a pattern. The bees are doing the same thing, gathering honey, gathering nectar and pollen, and they're creating honey, and they're doing that. And that's a pattern for every superorganism. So then these symbiotic other organisms are breaking that value down, that concentrated value, and returning it to the territory. So the territory is getting richer, which makes the territory worth defending. And that's why you see like ants or honeybees and wasps are so ferocious about this, because they've really invested in the place. So here's an example of that. Here's these termites in Botswana, and they create these mounds that can be like 30 feet high, and they stay within 1 degree Celsius all year long, and it's there's no fossil fuels involved. It's all their own collective intelligence and operations that do this. But when they do it, because they've got these fungal gardens under there that are breaking down the cellulose that they can't digest on their own, it's actually returning a lot of value to the habitat. So the grass gets greener and richer, and it draws more herbivores, and their droppings are enriching the soil and drawing carnivores, and those carcasses are enriching the soil, and it gets richer and richer and richer for everybody. And everybody has a role in it. Here's, these dung beetles rolling away the good stuff. So here is that same pattern for superorganisms. And I think this is a super rich pattern. So what you see is that, we members of a superorganism, they share an identity. There's one queen who begins the hive, and she makes all the workers, and they all do share that reproductive goal. They share a purpose and an identity, and they're almost one and the same. So what happens is they go out and they collect these particulate raw resources as individuals, and they all have different jobs, different roles in that. It's swarm creativity. Individuals have their own perceptions and expertise. Nobody's telling them what to do. They're completely self-organizing. And in the process of their work, they're upcycling these particulate resources with other species. And so this is coupled the same as it is for other organisms, where they want to invest in these symbiotic relationships in order to feed what feeds them. This is important. That's a general pattern for superorganisms. You see it in everything from slime molds to fungal mycelia underground, ants and honeybees and naked mole rats and us.
Does that change when the swarm is attacked in any way? Is there other features come out?
Yeah, that gets juicy.
Okay, cool.
We're headed there. So there's these 5 basic teaming patterns. And so for me, I see that we're superorganisms. And so you can use this as a basic kind of general structure pattern, and you can compare it to our own work and lives to see these deficits or missing potential that we could go to work on. So first off, they've got this shared identity, and they're collecting these particulate raw resources. And so what is this relationship here? It's the colony cannot exist unless they're eating, right? Like that's just basic. They have to eat. But now they have this role in the ecosystem where they're investing in these symbioses in order to do this. So they have a niche, or they have a source nutrient, and they have a niche. And this is interesting. What's that relationship about? What if you don't have shared identity? What if you're not investing in symbioses? So we can return to these questions. These are deep questions. And organizations can be asking these things about, like this is really getting to shared purpose. So what are these relationships? We'll talk more about that. So here you have these particulate raw resources, and individuals are doing different jobs to collect it and maintain the colony and all that good stuff. And they work in a team of teams, like that General Stanley McChrystal kind of thing. So that swarm creativity, where they're all taking on different jobs, what does that enable? It expands their total capabilities, right? So they can, we walk around feeling defective, and it's because we're supposed to be. We're not supposed to do everything. We're a super organism. And so we have these different talents and these different strengths, and that is the nature of that swarm creativity. But what's in the way for us? And we can come back to this conversation. But I think, we don't have a sense of we, like, who are we? Like, just because we all have a job at the same organization doesn't mean we share a purpose or an identity or any values. And we don't have any way to really grow, protect common value or trust, which is like superorganisms rely on that. And we don't have it. Well, we don't even have anywhere to grow symbioses and take care of them. I mean, what, on the freeway median? Or it's like, oh no, the city takes care of that. And then the short-term thinking and the global scale up with these one size fits all, that just destroys our unique potential and that diversity that is actually the raw feedstock of change and evolution. And then because of this process, the larger systems are not healthy. And so that restrains our ability to, invest in symbioses and to do these things. So we got all these little, things holding us back. And I think a lot of it too is that lack of belonging and role. You just hire somebody else to do that job, right? We're kind of swappable parts. So that collective intelligence is what allows them to work without being told what to do. It gives them freedom. So they can, they all have their own diverse perspectives and contributions and expertise, and they come together and they share that. And overall, it allows the community to be more resilient, to have a wider range of responses, and nobody has to tell them what to do. So they can do distributed work, and they're not stellar at this. Like, most of them are average, just like us. So they just constantly course correct each other, and they make small decisions, small things, but nobody tells them what to do, and they don't have any meetings or targets or any of that stuff. Here's the classic example: is this honeybee democracy. And that when the bees have to find a new home, they don't, one doesn't go out and say, yeah, this is the home, let's all go on Tuesday. They go, each one is going, all these different scouts are going out in different directions looking for the perfect place. They take their time, they share those insights with each other, and they have an honest competition of ideas through these waggle dances. So other bees are coming and seeing that waggle dance, and then they go, oh, there's an opportunity, there's some flowers blooming about that direction, about that far, and it's pretty good because she's doing a lot of those waggle dances. So then other bees see that and they go and check it out, and then you get this amplifying. The good dances amplify, the poor ones fade away, and eventually there's a tipping point, and the whole hive goes and flies to the new site. And so that's this collective intelligence. And what's in the way for us on that? We have different salaries. We're basically competing against each other. I mean, ants don't do that. They don't design their societies that way. And they don't, we don't feel like we belong. We don't have that psychological safety to really put out our independent thoughts and to stand by our different perspectives and to contribute that. So our collective intelligence is not very intelligent, and our swarm creativity is stunted because we don't really belong or have a role, and we're not encouraged to be independent or different. And we don't even share a purpose because our salaries are different. We're not equitably sharing our results. We lack the agency and the belonging and the hope and the interest and all those things. We can come in with all these great ideas about how to change the world, but this is the reality. And here's where it gets really interesting, because we think, oh, well, these processes we have are so efficient. I mean, we really are very efficient, my goodness. But those processes and structures were all imposed on us at some point. And so if for the purpose of stealing our community's wealth and reducing us to host labor, and we don't really even question this is just like the water we swim in, right? Because it's best practices for efficient, profit and impact. Scale it up. So here we go. There's that pattern again. But here, watch this. Little parasite has come in. Here he comes. And boom. This happens all the time for superorganisms because they have these great concentrations of wealth, honey, all these good things. And so parasites are always coming to try to steal that good stuff. So they use deception, they use theft, they try to get in, they take these things. So the first thing they do as a parasite is they take over the swarm creativity, they take over the host labor. So now no longer are organisms doing what they want to do, they're doing what they're told to do. And the classic example is the zombie, the cordyceps fungus, zombie fungus for ants, where now the ants, instead of doing their work, they trudge up these stalks of grass and they just bite on above the trails of the rest of their colony, and then they explode with a rain of parasitic debris on their colony mates. So that's how that happens. So once that happens, it's really the parasite just wants these raw resources for themselves. The only goal for them is to get that back. So suddenly your pentad has become a triad. So you've got host labor taking these raw resources, giving them back to the parasite. Now the shared identity is faltering and fading. The swarm creativity is gone. What happens now, you don't need, the parasite doesn't care about upcycling and regenerating and feeding what feeds you, because they're just going to move on. So waste starts to accumulate. And then the collective intelligence, nobody cares about that. In fact, you want to actively stop that because that's going to, become a restraint. That's the resistance right there. And so then you lose that. And so then you've really lost everything. And then pretty soon the particulate resources run out, and then the parasite just runs away. Just goes and finds a new one, goes to Mars. Oh yeah. So we're plagued by these parasites, and that's typical for superorganisms. So we have all these protective mechanisms. Here's what they've actually done is worked in these networks, teamed of teams, as a way of preventing parasitism. So they can quarantine now very easily. Little units can shut down, and yes, they vaccinate, they lick each other and spread the vaccine around. And then they have these structures where they keep the queen and the nursery way below ground and safe from parasites, because that's the family jewels right there. And then the older female ants work outside, and they do the more dangerous roles because it's less expense. Then it can partition this parasitism. And we don't have very many protective mechanisms other than some passwords on our bank accounts. So these teams are naturally resilient. And so it goes back to this tragedy of the commons that we have, this idea that if the users are benefiting from a common resource, but they're not paying to maintain it, the resource is doomed, and we kind of accept that as a reality. But what happens with superorganisms is they've stopped investing in that big brain size. And by distributing the leadership, they can maintain this neighborhood reciprocity, where only individuals with good reputations for being trustworthy can come in. And so if you go back, these are these gelada baboons that I worked with in Ethiopia, and they live in these huge groups because they live up in the mountains. There's no trees there, but there's leopards. So they can't hide from the leopards. So what they do is they bunch into these big groups. But unfortunately, that requires a lot of politics. And so my friend Robin Dunbar, he found that the larger the average group size in a species, the larger the average brain size. And it's because they have to monitor all these relationships. It's dominance. It's the central processing unit is for managing the dominance relationships. Who's trustworthy? Who can you share with? Who's your ally? And so you naturally get these kind of module size, like groups are 150. And if you were to look at the size of a human brain and guess what size group that we like to live in, it's 150. And you see that in military units historically, and village sizes, and even in like the Neolithic times, it hovers right around there. So that's about the level our brains can handle in trust and politics. So you can see that that these groups become very modular, team of teams, and that's naturally resilient. So you can see like where our brains increase in size as our group size grows, because the superorganisms have switched over to this network reciprocity model. They can actually decrease the investment they make in maintaining trust and politics. And that cost can go into other things, creating abundance. And we know that idea of the tragedy of the commons is false, because like if you look at meerkats, I saw these guys in Botswana a couple of years ago, and you would think, mathematically, if these meerkats are shrieking a warning every time a hawk flies over, those are the ones that are going to get eaten, right? So you would think they would stop doing that, but they do it all the time. So clearly there's some missing thing. And the same with people. Tragedy of the commons, it's impossible, and yet we share all the time, and we have for tens of hundreds of generations. So if the theory doesn't work in practice, it must be wrong. And so here's where we come into this pro-social, and I haven't talked about pro-social here at all. But this is, we do this work with David Sloan Wilson at the Evolution Institute, and that gave rise to pro-social. So what Eleanor Ostrom found was all these communities are sharing just fine. So she went and looked at what are they doing that works. And what she found is that they all share these 7 principles. And it's basically, you clearly define the boundary. The users are committing to some rules that were chosen by other members and are enforced by each other. And then anyone who disagrees with those rules gets excluded. And then anybody that violates rules, there's a sanction. And it's honestly, it starts with just jokes like, hey, buddy. But it does escalate, and it can culminate in exile. And even like in a lot of indigenous societies will actually execute those people. But you have to get their male kin to do it. So there's no revenge cycle. And then, so what's happening then is the entire resource's health is monitored and made visible to everyone. And so is each member's usage. And so you get this distributed leadership of members where they are mutually enforcing their own collective value. And then Eleanor actually added this last one when she realized that this only works if the larger systems respect their sovereignty. So she added that one. So this is, and I will say pro-social commons, check that out, because this is a process that can be used with any group that's really powerful. They're using it with women in the Congo. And it's pretty remarkable. And I think this is going to grow, and I think it's going to become a thing you want to keep your eye on. So the leaders don't need to know everything, you know, this is the fifth pattern in the superorganisms, is that the leaders don't need to know everything, but 1/3 of all the ants are acting as leaders. And really what they're doing is tying other little teams together. So they work in these little units of 3 in general, which is an interesting observation. Ants and honeybees do this, where 2 of them are just hard workers. And they just go to work on the thing. But the 3rd one is a wanderer. And so that one becomes like a leader that's sort of distilling patterns and sharing them with other teams. So it knits together this overall pattern without any one individual taking on the cost of doing that. And there's no administration. So you see this, like, you know, chimps are very dominant, but the bonobos have a quite egalitarian society. There are equal relatives. And the way they do it is anytime a male tries to dominate another, a female, she just calls her friends and shuts that down. And so they work in these trios, much like the ants and honeybees, to equalize the society. So I think that's interesting. I've got my bonobo revolution, baby. And I have t-shirts. If you want your bonobo revolution t-shirt, I think this is cool. But so if you go further than that, you know, the bonobos have their female alliances. But another way of looking at our, you know, moral systems are pretty rare in the animal kingdom. But what we kind of do is we use these moral systems almost like a bigger fish to scare other animals to think that we're more. So it's almost like an alpha chimp, our moral structures. You know, I think it's an interesting phenomenon to see that, to look at that. So as this 5th pattern of superorganisms is this distributed leadership, where they're all working to maintain the commons of their community so that they can accomplish the collective intelligence and swarm creativity and rely on each other to be fair and equitable and not be parasites. So this is the role of the distributed leader. They're facilitating collective intelligence and swarm creativity. They're growing that strength and clarity of purpose, because the queen is producing this scent that she's distributing through the colony. And that, you know, that's the decider for neighborhood reciprocity. Do you share the scent? Yes or no, you're in or out. And they grow potential by seeing it in one another and growing that. But mostly protecting this commons where everyone can help and share and nobody gets taken advantage of. So you see this equitable sharing. You know, chimpanzees, it's the males who hunt the food. They'll give bits to females they like, but it's really more bribery. You know, it's not the same thing. It requires transparent and truthful information flows. And what's interesting is, you know, it's the more players, the more soup. It's not pie, because by helping one another, we're actually growing the total value that we have. This is just, to me, my ultimate example and my inspiring example is that, you know, here, if we were to play these concepts forward in time. You know, here's these fungus, and there was a time when the plants were all aquatic, and the fungus actually supplemented those plants' roots and allowed them to move onto the land. And so now look at the world is covered in these amazing plants that feed us and all do all the things. But this is the foundation, a superorganism essentially. And then today, you know, you fast forward this and the fungi are trading sugar, you know, with nutrients, and they're actually supporting these mother trees, and they're feeding the mother trees seedlings. So it's a, you know, it's an investment in each other, rises all boats, is what they're doing. So we can ask, how might we do that? There's a variety of leverage points. I think that parasitized pentat is quite interesting, thinking about where the leverage points for preventing parasitism are, so we can get back on track. And these are some of those ideas. I did want to just add, before I open up the discussion, that this is coming out August 4th, and I'm going to do a whole course around that. And the people who join the course get the book first. That's going to be fun. Those are some of what I'm offering currently these days. So if you want to know more about anything, you can go to any of those sites and find out more. And then let's just talk about it.
Yeah. A few slides back, you were mentioning where two aspects cancel out, and I didn't catch what it was canceling out.
I remember saying that, but I can't remember what it was.
Yeah.
Right. So by growing and protecting the commons, they can create a space where, for instance, there's psychological safety. There's, you know, it holds a space where people can contribute without fear of being parasitized.
Yeah. Okay. That makes sense. Okay.
Yeah.
The commons protects against that.
Right. But you have to protect the commons, because that's where parasites steal value. So
Yeah.
you need that distributed leadership to protect that.
I think they're of the early model of, like, at least in New England, there was always a commons in the village.
Yeah.
And there's still vestiges of that, but that used to be where it was a common resource, and it was also a place where travelers could come through and stay, and you know, you could hitch up your horse or your cow or feed your animals. And it's all this sort of stuff that is now outlawed everywhere.
Yeah.
And that totally evacuates the core of the community from the enriching, enlivening aspect of transitionals, you know, and also the ability for those that live in the community to just take pride in that and meet there for communication. So it seems like there's a parasite that's caused that to happen.
Absolutely. Yeah. Get rid of the town square, get rid of the, you know, well, you don't want the people rising up against you.
And common to everywhere now, they outlaw the ability to camp overnight there. So all commons are closed at dusk, and that's like a tragedy.
Right.
That's the tragedy of the commons, that they've closed.
Yeah. And I was just writing about that, is that here we are, you know, we're living things, and it's tragic that we've called ourselves, you know, invasive species, and eradicated ourselves from the lands that we used to take care of. You know, like we actually, like you say, it is illegal to tend to commons together.
Yeah.
And why is that? Mm-hmm.
Only through special permitting and fees that go to that parasite can you
Wow.
use it.
Yeah, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Well, and that makes me think of gentrification too, right? How when you have an underserved community that is then cleaned up or beautified in some way, bioremediated, then immediately that means that there's very likely going to be wealthier people coming in and buying up property, and the standard people of that community get pushed out.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And for me, like I just went through the indigenous territory. I went down the river with an indigenous activist and stayed with the villages and everything. And it made me really realize, like, they are emergent from that place. And that is their nature. Like, it's to regenerate the society that feeds them. And so some of that is spiritual and some of that is functional and all kinds of things, but it is all one thing. And it also all comes out of one story, which is came out of the earth in that place. And so then I think, like, how do we get back there? Like you say, you make a place nice, invest in the place. Next thing you know, you can't afford it. And the rich people are, thanks for what you did.
We also live in a society where many of us are indigenous to nowhere. And so we don't really have any place that we belong.
That's so true. I mean, who are we? Like, you think about with indigenous societies, how do they work on swarm creativity? It's this whole thing of, like, you want to know, you are constantly looking for what others have. Like, what abilities can you develop in them for your community? We don't have any of that because we don't have a and I, like, you're actually, maybe you're going to get paid more than me for that. I don't know if I want to help you do that.
That's that core concept of the indigenous having that connection to land, which creates that shared identity. And I'm fascinated when you write parasite, because the identity of land is the site they live on.
Mm-hmm.
And the parasite then erases it, right? And creates a parasite.
That's right.
That's
right. They're working for the parasitic queen now.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So the site that is their home has been transplanted with a parasite.
That's yeah.
Which is pretty incredible that you've decoded the word.
Yeah. Yes. Parasite. Yeah. I mean, it's amazing.
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah. And so, I mean, I think about, like, what are the leverage points to shift this thing?
Doesn't that go back to the educational component? I mean, you talked about STEM where nature's not even mentioned.
Yes.
So that would be, I think the ultimate goal of a parasite is to be the feedback loop that tells us we're on the wrong track, so that we could respond more quickly as an emergency response, in the same way that a tree in the forest is the one that, recognizing the parasite is coming, they'll forgive themselves and give themselves up to the parasite to save the rest of the forest. So where in nature can we expand on that?
Well, that's a really interesting perspective, because in nature, parasites are the primary driver of evolution. So parasites are pushing organisms to diversify, to escape them. And so, evolution is actually driven by those parasites. So we can look at it as an opportunity for sure. And then the other thing is, like, if you look at parasites, the more their reproduction is tied to the reproduction of the host, the more their purpose becomes shared. And eventually, like, HIV just becomes absorbed into our genome. Like, monkeys have SIV, it's just in their genome. It doesn't do anything to them. because the purpose of the virus and the purpose of the monkey have become the same. And so, and that process is always going on. So I think about, okay, basically what we're looking at is reinventing capitalism. So how does that need to happen? And I think partly, you can execute parasites. That's one way, but you can, or, some kind of joke sanction system. But you can also, I think, find ways to realign the parasite and the shared identity so that it becomes one thing. That's what I'm thinking about, but I'm not sure how to do that.
So inviting a parasite has a possibility.
I don't know. Well, you think about, okay, with like Yellowstone, the deer, the wolves kept the deer moving on so that the grass kept growing, and that actually supported more deer. And it kept the entire ecosystem healthier. So maybe what we need is some wolves keeping us moving around.
See, one of the lines in the economic slide that you showed, the 7 steps, I forget who it was.
Oh, was that the Ostrom?
Ostrom, yes.
Mhm.
And what I found, the one line item that was a little bit on a challenging moment is when you sit in, yeah, there it is.
Did I find it?
97.
Oh yeah.
No, is that?
No.
No. there's
You're
another
looking
one.
for, I know the one you look, this one.
That, yes. So those who disagree are excluded.
Mhm.
That smacks of this being in a classroom and you're not getting what the teacher is speaking about. And you kind of get pushed aside because the rest of the classes wants to move on.
Mhm.
So we're not dealing with all the individuals. Everybody's supposed to be on the same level. Otherwise, you're left out.
Mhm.
So if you disagree, are you really excluded, or you're not understanding it and you need some more clarification? You want to participate, but then you kind of are kind of dismissed.
Right. And I think it comes back to how does nature scale? Like, it's not the giant elephant, it's these little communities, and they, of course, they're all going to have their different values and stories and identities. So you might go, well, yeah, no, this one's not for me, I'm going over there. So you need to have that freedom. But what they're really getting at is, okay, like here's an example. The lobster fisheries in Maine is one that was run this way, is run this way. And so they have clear boundaries, and anybody who wants to be in the lobster fishery has to agree to a certain set of rules. Like, we're not going to fish on these days, or we're not going to fish anything larger than this size, or we're going to share this, whatever those things are. And so you don't have to agree, you don't have to be a member. But in this collective, you do. So those people would just start another collective with their own rules, kind of thing.
That
Yeah.
kind of like when there's, if there's a new baby queen bee that basically, if they're not taken in as the new queen for that hive, then they have to go off and basically do their own hive.
Exactly. And then in like indigenous, like nomadic societies, that happens all the time, where people are like, yeah, I'm not doing that, and they just leave, and then they come back a couple months later or whatever. But people just move around by what they're okay with, what they want to do. So it's just much more self-organized.
So how does this comport with the idea of, say, island biogeography? So you've got an island, and the resources are limited, and it's kind of like, once the resource is used up, that's it, right? Until more resource appears. So I think the populations in those situations, I think maybe reach a steady state and are able to sort of work through the lean times when, so when the resources, because you've got oscillations going on, right, in these systems. So there are overruns and underruns of resources, and that sort of actually sets a sort of a bit of a regulatory regime into a system. So one, I think it helps to think about these systems in the larger context of varying, resource abundances and so on. And that's where intelligence and memory can be valuable to a species.
Especially for us, we've got these collective multi-generational knowledge, that's how we do that. But
So here we are, this is the first time we've ever had 7 billion people on the planet, right? And some stuff is going to happen that we just never knew about.
Yeah.
But the question is, can we figure it out soon enough before something else bad happens? And
I mean, I try not to think too hard about those things so I can sleep a little bit at night.
Right.
But yeah, those island biography thing, that's exactly where this comes from. Is the low investment opportunists roll up on the shore and they're like, ooh, no competitors, let's go. And then when things tighten up, they have to find a little different way to do things. And so that's what's diversifying all the species. And as you say, when things start getting locked up, they start partnering with one another to open new capabilities. And so, and that actually to me is a really interesting question, is if some new seed arrives at an island like that, it's an invader, right? It's an invasive species. But what does it take to become a naturalist, a native? What does that entail? Is it
maybe a few cycles of learning?
But also I think you have to give value to other species there. Like the relationships have to form. And then other species become invested in you, keeping you around.
Yeah. Well, keep in mind, we're talking about processes that have taken millions, if not billions of years.
Yes.
And we're trying to do things in what, last week?
Yeah. Yes. And you always have to be watching for that scale because things don't work at every scale. The gecko walking across a wall, it doesn't work at jet size. So even though these patterns are the same at every scale, they are also affected by scale. So yeah. Let's see, what else did I want to go back to here? I wanted to get into some of these relationships because I think they're very interesting. What if you don't have shared identity? What does that do to symbiotic upcycling and vice versa? I mean, you could see like when it's parasitized, they're not taking care of the symbionts anymore. They don't care. And so I think some of these questions can really bring up places where we could intervene. And that's why I'm asking.
I think one place we sometimes get caught up is in our metaphor. So if you think of, say, not a single species, but a multi-species, a guild, right?
Yes.
We can maybe think a little bit differently about how some of these systems evolve, right? So, for instance, we have a lot of chipmunks here, and those little chipmunks, whenever they see something they think is a predator, they'll scream, you know.
Hmm.
And other species hear about that and they respond to it. And I think those relationships, it's like nobody invented that. It just happened,
Mhm.
I guess. And yet it works. So, you know, I think one way to think about, you know, how we could make use of our relationships with other species, you know, just pay more attention, right? And a lot of indigenous communities do this, you know, they pay attention to what the birds do.
Yeah.
And they act on it, right? So it's not like, you know, we're the only party on the block, right?
Right.
There's, yeah, be a member of the community,
Mhm.
and these communities are complex, and
Mhm.
so this idea of kinship, I think for me, is really kind of intriguing. When you talk about identity, what does that mean? What does that really mean?
Mhm. Well, for me, I mean, as a biologist, shared identity means reproductive purpose. So,
I think it could mean a lot more than that.
well, I use it metaphorically, so
Yeah,
I do go
yeah.
beyond that. But ultimately, it does tie back to what makes more in evolutionary time.
Well, it's not just reproductive purpose, but say, you know, a warning call, you know, that's more than reproductive. That's a survival value.
Right. But the ones that do it, you would think would produce less offspring. And so there would, or it would
Well, the
decline.
ones that are attuned to it, the ones that are attuned to it survive. So
There
it's,
you go.
you know, it makes a difference.
Yeah. And, you know, they're related to each other. So when I help you, you know, my genes for doing that are increasing as well.
Yeah, and if you think
And if
about it, you know,
so-
we're what, 95% chimp, and we're probably 75% chipmunk, right? If not more.
Drosophila right here. I'm going Drosophila.
So it's like, yeah, it's not like black and white. It's, you know, shades of gray and, you know, shades of color here.
Yeah. Yeah. But I think it's very interesting to break it down into this pattern, because when you talk about like regenerative circles, they generally want to try to focus on taking less resources, you know, or breaking down waste, like recycling and those kinds of things, or, you know, planting trees. So those are the kind of the three things that people really come up with as leverage points, but none of them actually are, because they're all side effects of the process. They really are not going after the leverage points. And like, you know, all the recycling talk, you know, we know that we got parasitized with that. Like that was just taking our labor so that we didn't do anything else.
So would quorum sensing be more under shared identity or symbiotic upcycling, or both? Or is quorum sensing this orange line?
Quorum sensing is that horizontal line between collective intelligence and swarm creativity. I mean, this is only for superorganisms, but well, now, okay, because a lot of that signaling, quorum sensing, is done, like, for instance, by other species, like bacterial sensing.
Yeah,
So
and they're different, right?
Yeah, in that way, that's that's the collective intelligence to symbiotic upcycling connection.
Got it.
Mm-hmm. Cool.
And so I would just sort of want to bring that in of like, how can we change the focus from, hey, here's recycling, to, hey, here's how we can actually come together and make better decisions about how to move forward, instead of just going with whatever sort of leadership decides is the way, sort of top down to save the planet, right?
Oh, and that's the other thing, you know, you always come back to the save the planet and Gaia and these big wonderful, can't we all get along kind of things. But that's not the way that evolution works. It works in these little populations and these little modules. You know, I mean, we see with the okay, let's say that our ancestors and ourselves do best in groups of 150 because we can manage the trust. And then we like to work in these teams of like 3 to 5, networked by, you know, shared purpose. That's the way we like to work. But where's the opportunity to do that, to work in that way?
Hyper local, right?
Hyper local. And so, you know, and then, you know, you see the queen is basically creating the entire workforce out of herself. It's all her. But then when you go to like the Kuniala, where I was just traveling, it all comes out of this shared origin story, and it is manifested in the land, in that place. So that land is really part of them. It really is all one thing. And actually staying there with them and living that way, I was like, yeah, that's what they're doing. They're super organisms, and this is a territory. And so how are we going to get from here to there if we have none of that? I don't know who my neighbors are. We have walls between our houses. I don't know what creatures are moving in between us. And, you know, there's none of that.
Well,
So-
we have to understand how we got from there, where we were, to here in order to answer that question, because we were all tribal.
Yes, we were all indigenous once. It's all
Yes, we were. And then there was a parasitic takeover that systematically, and is still systematically, eradicating all the native, indigenous, tribal intelligence and people. I mean, that's just the genocidal wave of the Western mind.
And diversity.
And
Right.
diversity, yes.
That's
And
right.
so what you have been presenting is, you know, presented in the domain of the physical and the body and the mechanism and organisms. But of course, all of that is operating in us humans on the psyche level because of our individualized spirit, unlike the animals, most animals.
Yeah.
So it's in that level. And so the parasitic action has been to systematically decouple us from our identity with the land.
Yes.
And that has uprooted us, literally, so that we are not grounded.
Yeah.
And without that grounding, we are
Kind of
floating. We're petals floating on a sea, and we can't root. And so if you can't root, you also can't crown. And there's our problem, because even our 7 chakras are, if you want to look at the light body development from way back, it's still illuminated as only the core 7, which is actually just our trunk. An Egyptian mythology about the Osirian body and the 14 members that Isis had to remember is still our chore, because we've got to bring those 14 back, because some of them connect down to the root, some of them connect up to create our crown.
Mm-hmm.
Within that, then you can get the shared identity from beyond just the locale, because now you have the shared identity of our mother Gaia. That's huge. And now we can exercise then swarm creativity if we also are instrumental in eradicating the original parasitic programming that came in.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that's the domination that culminated from thousands of years ago into the domination code of the Catholic Church, which is still legal law at being exercised and cited in this country, Canada, and elsewhere.
Yeah.
And it's the justification for that genocidal action.
Yeah. And we still have terra nullius.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Within the monetary system, which is fiat-based, which again is imaginary. And so the swarm creativity only occurs within a region of people that we call corporations now, mostly, that are working in a very close cooperative manner. And when they don't do that, applying a lot of your stuff, then even their productivity falls back because it's not swarm creativity.
Right.
Because we're not symbiotic upcycling. We're not exercising collective intelligence.
Yeah.
We're not defiving.
So I'm working with Cisco on for WebEx to putting all this into algorithms that help with this stuff, but it all began with this virtual reality project that they had. And so they were so excited about it. And I put it on and I'm like, there's no ground. Like we're literally floating on this little grid. Where is this? But that's the thing about everything. And even, I would even say there's a lot of resistance, like for instance, with Regenesis Institute, where they're always saying, oh, it's all about place. You've got to have place because that's the shared future and that's the identity and all that. And there's so much resistance when you talk to people about that, because they're like, that's just not practical. Really, I'm working in networks all over the world. And I'm doing, and so the disconnect is huge. Simply not practical, because we've totally, this orange line, we just kind of hope someone's taking care of it, but nobody is.
Right.
It's not relative to, it's not relevant to our work as far as we can see.
And we haven't created the means where it actually generates income.
Okay, right. And so I have a plan for that. I don't know if I'm going to get into that. I got it. Okay. My crazy.
Well, glad you're thinking about it.
Yeah, I got a plan. I don't know if it'll work.
Right. Yeah, I got a plan too.
Oh, you do? Oh, maybe we'll scheme.
So what did you say before about the parasitic relation with swarm creativity?
Right. So, yes, we all have different jobs. And so we still have some pretense of swarm creativity, but you get hired for a job with a fixed job description. It's not really, yes, they're still there, but not in that way where we're tuning to each other. And it's definitely compromised. How about that? And so the host, the parasite, is willing to tolerate as much swarm creativity as it takes to get the resources back to them. But they don't really care about it. And so, we spend all this time, like in indigenous communities, they want to notice each other's abilities and develop them for the community. And there's nothing in this that requires that, because there's no ongoing relationship between the labor and the parasite.
This is interesting to me too, to think about it in the sort of realm of biomimicry as an industry, and how, we're working to develop more people who understand the concepts of biomimicry and are interested in going out and doing that work. And yet there's definitely a scarcity mindset about the work that is available, and about the idea of, well, there's the possibility that a parasitic organism could steal our ideas and leave us without resources. And I think it's an interesting quandary to look at, of like, how could we sort of leverage these ideas to, I don't know what the answer is, really.
You clearly have to stitch our collective intelligence and swarm creativity back to land. And how do you do that? And like you're saying, there's no way to make a living doing, let's say you're an elder that's doing a spiritual practice that regenerates that relationship with that symbiotic, Cisco's not paying for that. So it's really hard to make a living as an artist or an elder or someone that's keeping an old craft or a language alive or any of these things. And so, we have these surface rights and we have mineral rights, say this idea for biocultural rights, where we would start these land trusts, NFT land trusts, like alt land trusts. So every living thing is unique, and the same is true for our artistic creations and the stories and all of these things. So why can't you have NFTs for them, certifying the uniqueness and generating some kind of benefit to those creators, so suddenly they can make a living doing those things that actually regenerate humanity in our human way in places, real places. So that land trust then has this common value that can be increased, and that they can, and so, but then it becomes a third layer of this biocultural resources that can, you know, I feel like high school students or anyone anywhere in the world could start that on a piece of land. And so that can stitch it back to that, and it can re-support those rehumanizing cycles.
That's exactly the concepts that we're working with in the Universal Foundation for Holistic Design.
Ooh.
And through what we call an 80-20 system. And our founder is down in Colombia right
Are you
now.
talking about Eli?
Yes.
I
Yeah.
work directly with Eli. I'm in a group. I see him every week.
Oh my goodness. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I do too.
Yeah, Harry too. We work with him. We work with him.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Well, he's, you know, he's the whole 80-20 system is to create this collective intelligence through the use of small collective farms and the native intelligence, and putting ultimately 80% of the land into wild, while 20% is in a pluralistic development of, and the value through direct to market, you know, collective commerce allows for the maximum value to be returned to be the driver for them to move the bulk of their up to 80% into the wild, so that it will all become super productive again.
Well, that's so geoversity. That's kind of what we do. We work with indigenous communities to work with campesinos and the landowners around, and we have a demonstration forest, and so that we teach this, you know, best practice. Like they teach each other, to be honest.
Yeah.
But it just breaks down those barriers of like, God, why are those guys spraying those pesticides over there? You know, and then the Kuna are going, but that water that goes into our water downstream, and they're like, oh, I didn't even realize, you know, stuff like that. So it regenerates that whole relationship.
It seems like there's really group interest in doing that, because completely separately, Ray and Nina Christ from the Jaguar Path in Costa Rica have funders, and they're looking for they've been looking at land, you know, 1,000-acre tracts to buy in order to develop rewilding areas and jaguar pathways, and to bring in that native intelligence as well.
Yeah, we've got 22 jaguars moving through our land, and it's awesome because we work directly with the Kuna. So like we just all work together in that area to do that.
That's awesome.
But it's pretty wild, and but the other thing you think is like 80% of the remaining biodiversity is in those areas managed by indigenous people. So, but how they need the ability to communicate with the larger systems that they're within.
Yes.
So we do a lot of
and to protect them ultimately from the parasitic corporate, you know, domination.
I mean, you talk about informed consent.
And the pirates that come in and scrape the land.
That's right. And you talk about informed consent. How can you have informed consent? You don't even know. You don't even know what you're talking about, because it's a different worldview.
Right. So ultimately, that is sort of like a maybe what we're picturing is like the bottoming out of a slinky dropping down. And now it's going to rebound because we're collecting, because now we can like totally understand and value that indigenous basis of land and knowledge, which we have, which we divorced ourselves from for all sorts of reasons. And now that slinky wants to come back up and bring that up into the spiraling of the rest of the culture. I don't know.
Yeah, well, I didn't know. I feel like there has been a shift where people are like, okay, our land management practices don't work, and here's the thing. So in this tropical band, we're going to try to do that. So I think that this stuff is really powerful.
I would like to add something to that.
Oh,
I really like this perspective of how the swarm is parasited right now, because I already had this thought from many sources, and I haven't seen it from the population side perspective of the swarm intelligence. But I think that it is not just like it seems that we are not just being parasited. And all the Latin American, we call this process as decolonization, and I think that it should be like a deparasitation.
That's what it is.
But actually, what it is coming from is like the whole behavior is of a parasite. You know, like just extraction and taking over the mindset and dividing the collective connections into, you know, like having just your own individuality, not connected with anything else, and you know, all your devices that you can just watch every second, and not being really in contact with anything else. So I think that the one thing that I would add to that territory perspective is us as a territory, like each of us, like a coming back to our territory and identify in our psyche, in our behaviors, in our relationships, which behaviors are parasite behaviors.
So true.
And doing that, just observing the parasite. And one thing that happens when with parasites are observed is that they doubt. They are like trying to like, oh, they saw me, you know.
They don't want to
it's kind of shit. Now what? And I think that observation should be collective. So what I have been experienced with my work with communities and doing biomimicry with communities is that like the natural flow of energy goes to observe the parasite. Like normally the people will just like a intelligent system. When the parasite is triggered, everybody looks at it and it starts to struggle on how we are going to take back the power on them. But as we are a collective again, it is more difficult for them to be, you know, like, so it's kind of just keep going with, you know, like our inner observation and what everything that we understand as colonizer, you know, like as extractivist, as and it doesn't really matter if you are not, you know, like you drink a Coca-Cola, you know. It's like it is not that hard with ourselves. Right. It is more that like how we are managing our own energy in this flow of events, and the experience is that at some point everything settles. It seems like there are moments, and I think that this is very related with meditation. In meditation, when you are observing your mind running, it's kind of the same habit, and at some point it settles down. And then it is kind of, if we know this information that you just shared, okay, we can jump onto creativity and say, okay, what we need to do in order to just not being parasited again. You know, like what is the look at? And I think that in a bigger collective mode, it will be something like stopping transactions, financial transactions. One day we stop to do financial transactions, like
Well, it's like
gone,
little
or
kids,
things like that, you know, like
your little your child does something and you're like, no, we just don't do that. We're not doing that. And you just stop them. But if we all did that, I mean, isn't that what indigenous people
yeah,
always
exactly.
it,
And
There's an
that's why indigenous people are in so much distress, because they have been resisting decolonization for years and thousands of
exactly.
years.
And so you know, we have this, and that's I want to do my next thing on assumptions we make about human nature, because like I read this stuff, and even in the regenerative literature I see the same assumptions about humanity and nature and like what we can do and all these things. And humans are flawed, and we need, you know, there's these deep assumptions that we don't ever talk about, and I think a lot of them are parasitic that prevent us from
Right. So there's someone who has been working very actively for quite a number of years on that. And she was raised on a farm. Her instigation is from her connection with the land. Her name is Joy Gilfillan, and she's working through what she calls the intentional change network. And she has evolved triangular models of exactly what you were talking about, Melina, if I'm pronouncing your name correctly, of the personal bioenergetics and how that works in the psyche, and you know, the psychic triangular cycles that we go through. And then on the civic level, that same triangle is looked at as what's happening now, and she calls that the physics of civics. And it's actually how those trauma triangles and things that influence and repeat the cycle are enacted on a community level, and very vociferously and intentionally through the existing structure in a way that's been hidden from us. And then how to move that into group community action that's intentional and joyful. So moving that fear into joy, and then getting that group collective energies that you're defiving, if you don't mind me saying that, in the superorganism. So yeah, and joygilfillan.com will take you to her website.
GILALIN.
I gotta write it out. GILFILEN.
Can you type it in the chat? I cannot write the spelling English.
Yeah, let me do that.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I haven't been able to share yet because I came in like halfway through your presentation, but I just wanted to say how valuable I think this is. It just brings me to tears, really, because these are the kinds of things that we really need to understand. They should be priority for everyone, and they're hidden. They're part of the milieu. We just kind of live it and don't even see them. So it takes a lot to call them out and make sense of them. And I'm so grateful to know that you're doing this. And I'm hoping you're going to automatically send the recording from today and the slides so I can review it. Okay. And Melina, I wanted to say, I think what you just said was really so helpful, because the spiritual preparation, if you will, the spiritual journey of going in and understanding at a deeper level what's really going on is for the moment, but it's also preparation for a future moment that we can't anticipate yet, when the forces will align, that we can jump on a solution, a tipping point, if you will, or however we want to look at that. And I think it's, I don't know, just as a pragmatic thing, it helps to know that what we're doing is working and is contributing, even if we feel so frustrated at times that, you know, we can't get any kind of solutions done. We can't, what is our individual agency worth, you know, really, and we all go through that cycle. But I think that you just expanded my sense of, I do a lot of climate communication, and I can really encourage people to just keep preparing and keep doing the work, and know that, you know, as we're all doing it, opportunities will present themselves, and they'll come from this kind of, you know, thinking that we haven't applied in the past and so forth. So I've really been grateful to be listening in as much as I have been able to.
Oh,
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
To that point, and
Thank you,
to the
Jamie.
points that some of the others have been making, I think there's another level of, or layer here that that I think you haven't really addressed yet, Tamsin, and maybe it's a future program, but we kind of alluded to it at a couple of points in the conversation. One was sort of thinking about that island biogeography metaphor. So that has a thick boundary, right? That, yeah, and you know, sort of think about, you know, that in sort of the spiritual term, building up that spiritual resilience, you know, is sort of having a thick boundary. The other one is a concept from a guy named Ross Ashby, and that's requisite variety, right? You need to have enough variety in the system to be able to work through that potential overwhelm that the parasitic community, and it is a community, can bring into, you know, into the invasion setting, right?
Yeah.
And then also sort of the idea of compartments, right? That's sort of related to the boundary ideas, that, you know, it's not that, you know, the earth is a single entity. It's many entities. And if we think about, you know, how are we going to deal with, you know, the hugeness of the earth? Well, yeah, the earth is big, but it's not just one thing, it's many things. And asking, well, what's the closest thing for me, right? Where's my thick boundary? Or maybe it's a couple of layers, right? What layers of boundary am I in, a part of? You know, so you've got your locale, your city, your town, your nation, and what do you bring at each of those levels? You know, so I think the answers are there, the tools are there, but sort of the understanding and the ability to apply it, that's, you know, that takes work.
Yeah, yes. And so much when I have these conversations, it tends to come back to some like people want to, what can we do to save the world? And it's like, hey, just your people need to reconnect and regenerate your culture for restoring that place. Because we've lost so much of our stories and all the connections.
Yeah, I'm listening to everybody's input, and I'm finding that the basic premise that it starts within ourselves, in ourselves, because our cells are listening to everything we think and share. And I'm always touched by the notion of the electromagnetic field of the planet. And we get to see it when the skies turn green in the north. But then it's our heart has the same electromagnetic field at our scale, and we measure the same shape and form, so that everything about us, when we talk about body electric, is connected to planetary electric. And when we walk into a room and magically connect with someone, it's based on that field that we're in. And if we focus and become aware of our field, we have the ability to maximize and share with everyone in the joy of that field. And that's how we begin to market that in a way that everybody could participate and not have to buy into it, but just have them recognize that they come with that as a vessel, that we're here now in our lifetime. We are that vessel of spirit, and that vessel that has the capacity to make the change that we all we are working towards. We've done it already. We are the voices that are bringing this forward. And it's how do we amplify this? And together we've been amplifying it quite well, given after 25 years of biomimicry, it's been expanded quite extraordinary across the world. So intention is a key driver. When parasites have that intention, they succeed. Now, we who have the opposite thought have that intention of how to either invite them so that we can convert them or participate in having them exit quietly. So it's an enormous gratitude for today, Tamsin, that you've been presented this wonderful opportunity again, and you do that each time. So thank you for that. But the notion of how we are doing it, I'm an addicted optimist, and I know that we could do this, and that's what keeps me going on a daily basis.
Yes.
So to meet everybody, I think this, Anna, this is the first time I've met you on a Zoom call. Melina, I've seen before, and Jamie, I've just met. So thank you, Jamie, for your input on that notion of wanting to see more of what we're doing. We all agree, we do too. And Eric too, and Randall. Randall and I go back since the beginning of the group in biomimicry in New York. So we have a history together as well. So from all of that, there's so much essence in everything that we share and everything that we speak of, and how much more we keep expanding. And we just need to know that we keep expanding. So thank you.
Thank you, Harry. Well, that gives me kind of a segue to a little more about what my next steps are. So I've basically, this book is coming out in 2 weeks, or I'll be done in 2 weeks. And then that's going to become a course for business schools all over. So I just recorded one for 45,000 executives, and those are all companies over 500 million. So, and then working with Cisco, they want to get this out to their clients. So the way I see it is that if you can put this into the DNA of these, major innovative companies and into the entrepreneurs that are coming up, I think you can get a critical mass of people that are thinking this way. And maybe they're not thinking in terms of save the world, they're thinking in terms of their business. But they can see that the things they want to have happen can happen much faster and much more powerfully and grow their future potential in this way. So they come on board with that mindset. And then they go, oh, if I really want this thing to stick around and grow value and all these things, I am going to have to regenerate that orange line and feed what feeds me again. And so I, in my naivete and my relentless optimism, what was the word you used? Oh, what was it? You're muted.
Addicted optimism. He's on mute.
I am an addicted optimist, just like that. Yeah. And so I believe that there's going to be a critical mass where, because all the companies I talk to are like, yeah, we know we need to do these things, but we can't do them. And the administration is so great to make people do these things. It's a killer. But now imagine you could get rid of that layer because your shared purpose was so strong that people were like, yeah, I know what to do. Like, I'm just going to go to work on that. So I feel like after having studied this for 30 years, like, I feel like we can identify some leverage points that we can actually go to work on. And it isn't really recycling, it's much more basic things of small communities and places, and that reconnection to the land. And then also that understanding that we're all defective separately. And so, we're all moping around depressed and defective. That's how you're supposed to be. Because, you're not supposed to raise your children by yourself in your house.
Well, I'm reminded of one of the things I learned early on in biomimicry training, and that was that viable organisms have this capability to sense and respond to their environment, right? And in a lot of ways, we're kind of growing new antennae here, right? New ways to sense and respond to what's going on. And it's amazing that, you know, it's sort of this incredible gift that human beings are able to do this. You know, yeah, we have these big brains. We just don't use them very well sometimes.
Well,
Well,
yeah.
if I,
Yeah, go ahead.
if I could respond to that, because the antenna, for example, that's going on right now is as soon as Harry started speaking, the winds picked up really, really strong. And so Mother Sophia is like saying, yeah, clear it out. Let's do it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the wind of spirit. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, exactly. And our luminous field does expand when we're fully connected to and rooted with the mother. And so our heart is more synchronous. And yet most of the places that traditionally in the past we used to meet at, instead of through the little windows of the Zoom, all the big hotel convention centers and stuff, were all very destructive of the bioenergetics, what I call the biodynamics of our body. So you're in those places, you tend to start shutting down.
I hate them.
All your energy collapses, and then you can't be as vital in your interchange. And of course, they were always dominated by one person. So the presentation was everything. And so the interaction didn't occur that we get to do now. So this is all its own really huge creative swirl of potentiality that's happening. And so all of our individual ideas and our heartbeats are being intertwined here. It's huge.
Mhm.
And so we just got to keep moving it, because it isn't just what we do locally. That's very important, but it is also what we project into the field. And we know now that it is that we're living in a conscious world. The consciousness is primary. Nassim Harriman has made that clear, as well as a lot of others. I've known Nassim for 22 years now. It's beautiful what he's bringing through in the unified field.
All right, who's that?
Nassim Harriman. He has written the papers on the unified field that Einstein was trying to bring forward. And it is that, space-time is something that is a positioning system for consciousness. Everything is conscious. When we come from that position, it changes our perspective entirely. Yeah.
Something about that, because I had Lyme disease. I was bitten by the tick, and in my journey to heal Lyme, I found out that one invasive species was part of the herbary's protocol for Lyme, and actually the distribution of the plant was following Lyme. Like it came from Asia and went into Europe and then jumped in North America. And I realized that, there is a consciousness of Gaia, which is kind of, we are like not getting it totally. And very, very clever and interesting perspective, especially for biologists who are very attached to invasive species, like this description that we used to think like that, but yeah, it's like it is not really. And when we wander around and we really observe our feelings, like if I am sad or something, these days it have been kind of heavy days, and if you just ask, people will say, I have been crying without knowing why, or I have been passing difficult times, and this is because Earth actually is helping us not to feel better, but to become better at feeling, you know, like just kind of. So we need to purify our feeling system, our sensing system, in order to capture the information she is trying to bring to us, because she is part of the thing, like totally.
And the irony is, like, to keep us parasitized, we end up like taking all these prescription drugs to just make it through the day or what have you.
Exactly, the blue pills.
It's all part of the parasitic cycle. It's like,
right.
Yeah.
Yes. And it is very strange, because when we think about a parasite, it's kind of, there is just one parasite there. So when you feel that the whole humanity is parasited, like most of us and all of us had a little bit or a lot of it, and that when you see that people are not parasited, it seems like, or it appears like they are not following the rule that it is the normal thing. So we are at that point. Exactly.
We look like the crazies.
Yes. Exactly.
Have you been successful in eradicating Lyme disease from within you?
I hope so. Well, it was like 6 years ago, and I haven't had any symptom. I just observed the bull eye mark.
Yeah, I'm curious
so
about what plant you're referring to, because I've had it like
It's
6
the-
times.
Oh my God.
Oh, really? Is the knotweed Japanese knotweed?
You're kidding. Oh, well, that
The root
explains.
of it.
That's very interesting.
It is
'cause-
super interesting. Yeah.
all right. So number one, I live in Old Lyme, Connecticut,
Okay.
where this was found. Number two, we have Japanese knotweed all over our yard. And we've
Holy
been
cow.
trying to get
Yes,
rid
I
of it
know.
for 26 years. Not successfully. It's yeah. But no, that's really very interesting. It's an incredibly invasive and robust plant.
The medicine is in the root, so you have to dig the wooden root is super harsh, and
It is.
and chop it with axe, and you know, like a
Believe me,
until the point that you can
I
put
have
it in a coffee grinder.
Well, it's full
make
of
it powder.
it's full of resveratrol, which is great. But no, I know about the roots. I've spent weeks pulling them out of the ground. And
There's just there's this extended knowledge base that we are getting more and more access to in order to work with these things and to realize why we're having that, why it's returning to us, and how to move on. And that's really the beauty of your work, Dr. Tamsin, and thank you so much for that. And it's really cool that you're working with Eli. So
He's great.
how can we support you more?
Well, you know, we're doing a whole program out for World Unity Week. Eli and Harry and I, and we got some other people. So that's going to be super cool.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. We got quite a few things going on. Oh yeah, if you want to, I mean, like I say, I'm getting ready to do the next course and to record it. So if any kind of thoughts or feedback you want to share with me, I love that. Email me, Dr. Tamsin at drtamsin.com.
Thank you, Tamsin.
All right. Well, thank you. I'm so glad to see you all.
likewise.
Okay.
All right.
Take it easy.
Thanks a lot.